Did you?
that I threw up on the side of the
Oh,
pool.
that was. I think we just kind of splashed water on it and left. With Matt, we wouldn't have, you
Yeah.
know,
hmm
yeah.
Well, that's a fun
So,
note to end on, don't you think?
yeah, that time I almost drowned my brother.
Welcome to Legalese. I think we're on episode 9. And good to see you, Mike.
Good to
How you
see
doing
you.
today?
Doing great. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
I don't
So
know
to oh, go ahead.
when you're doing a podcast and someone can listen to it whenever. Is it
That's true.
appropriate to say happy Friday? For us, it's
Well,
Friday afternoon and we're in a great mood.
I also spend a week editing this, and then it comes out like basically 10 days after we record. So, hello, 10 days in the future.
You
Um,
know, could be a whole new world by then.
that's true. Hopefully, a better one. So, today we are gonna, for the first half, we're gonna be looking back at car accident claims. So, we've been looking at work comp for a few weeks, but and we have spent an episode talking about the property damage claim. So today we're going to talk about those things for someone who's injured in an accident that follow the property damage claim. Um, and then we're also going to talk about parenting in the second half of the episode. I came across a really interesting article um, about parenting, about millennials being hesitant about kids, generally speaking. So we'll talk about that the second half of the episode. Um, so why don't we jump in here, Mike? So in a car accident claim, you have that initial property damage claim where you get the value of your vehicle replaced, and this is in the context when somebody else is at fault for the accident. So, um, what are the other two claims that kind of come into play in a car accident situation, and what how do those work?
Sure. Yeah. There can be so many different claims. We tend to talk about three, but there's really four different insurance policy claims, and there can be five, depending. But let's talk. So we've talked about property damage. The property damage claim is usually a separate claim. And then you have what's called the PIP in Kansas. So this is Kansas specific. Different states have different kinds of versions of this law. Sometimes it's called med pay, meaning medical payments. Uh, but in Kansas, we have what we call personal injury protection, and that is a statutorily created law which requires every vehicle's insurance policy to have this, and it is coverage for you that front pays regardless of fault. So sometimes it's also called a no fault provision. And so, regardless of fault, you have personal injury protection benefits for you. And so, if you're in an accident, you get those benefits. The minimum benefits on that are $4,500 in medical, $900 per month in lost wages. So, not that much. But really, when you look at the policy reason, I remember listening to, or when I was first learning how to do these cases, Dad would explain it the same way. My dad started this law firm, and he would explain it. Well, before you had PIP, everybody would sue each other uh, or the hospitals would start suing plaintiffs before the end of the claim. And so this is a way for those medical payments to get made without hospitals suing individuals. And 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 that the PIP policy has been in place for a really long time. But certainly the third claim that we talk about is the liability claim, which is the claim against the at-fault driver. That literally does take years, or can take years, to get to a jury to determine what is owed by that liability insurance company. And so certainly hospitals and medical providers were not getting paid for a really long period of time. So the legislature stepped in and required insurance companies to provide this additional benefit to get some of these medical bills paid. How that makes sense in our current healthcare system is maybe a different question. Well, it's a policy question. Um, so all of that is to say, what you need to know is if you're in an accident, the first payment of medical bills is through your personal injury protection coverage, which is your insurance, which confuses most, maybe not most, but a lot of our clients. They're like, well, why is my insurance paying this medical bill? It's their fault. Shouldn't theirs pay it? And it is for that reason. It's to get the treatment covered. But most people also only have the minimum coverage. So that is 4,500. That's taken up by an ER visit easily. Uh, um, in fact, it's been a while since we've had an ER visit that isn't at least 4,500. And part of that is probably because of the policy, but that's kind of a complicated economics
Hmm.
question.
I haven't thought of
Uh,
that before.
but well, um,
Hospitals know not to charge less than $4,500 for their car accident.
well, I would say a lot of providers do. There's a lot of good chiropractors out there that know that there's this $4,500 benefit that they can bill against, uh, and that's part of their business model,
Hmm.
and there's nothing wrong with that, but it just creates a market for it, you know.
So what do you
Uh,
do? Let's say you went to the ER, that ate up your whole $4,500, but you still need a lot more treatment. So what
yeah.
happens now?
So at that point, uh, you need a PIP exhaust letter from your insurance company, and you need to get that to both. We send it to both the providers and your regular health insurance. And that's very important because your regular health insurance knows that there's this PIP benefit in Kansas. And so they won't make a payment until that's exhausted. And so that is a hiccup we see all the time. Uh, well, that's hyperbolic. It's a frequent hiccup that we see.
Hmm. Well,
And so
yeah, I was just going to say there's also, along with that exhaust letter, the PIP will write a log of payments that they've made. And I've encountered situations where the health insurance will ask for the log too,
yeah,
before they're willing to kick in.
yeah, yeah. And really the only insurance provider that's not really aggressive at making sure PIP is exhausted has been lately Kansas Medicaid will issue
Mm-hmm.
payments first, and that's kind of odd, um, but something we've seen lately. That's changed over the course of my career,
Mm-hmm.
but with the latest contractors, that's been the case. Um, so so that's the first thing you need to know is your car insurance pays first through PIP for your medical bills, and then once that's exhausted, your regular health insurance takes over. And then once you've completed treatment, at that point, do you get to we gather your medical records and bills and submit that through a demand packet to the liability insurance company or the at-fault driver's insurance company, and negotiate a settlement that includes the cost of those medical bills. And here's where it can get even more complicated is who gets paid back out of the final settlement or uh, jury verdict uh, depends on a lot of different
A
things. So
lot.
the general rule is that PIP gets paid back.
Mhm.
Whatever they pay out, they get paid back. They also cover the attorney's fees for that portion of the claim. That's the first rule. However, the exception to that is if uh, the PIP benefits and the liability payments are non-duplicative, and that's a word that's in the statute. And what that means is you're hurt this much in terms of damages, and the PIP and liability payments only cover this much. So they're not duplicative. I mean, that's the best way I can explain it, I think.
Yeah, it's
Maybe
not
it's not
that
the best way, but
they're not paying for the same damages.
exactly. Yeah.
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 Hmm.
That's a better way to say it rather than just
That's why I'm here, Mike.
you hurt this much. It only pays that much. I don't know. The so if it's non-duplicative, then you do not have to, they are not subrogated. They are not legally required to be paid back. Then the other thing to consider is whether your regular health insurance gets paid back. Kansas has a law against subrogation for health benefits, and so does Missouri. Um, and so the general rule is health insurance does not get paid back in Kansas. However, uh, a lot of health insurance plans are not true health insurance. They're organized under a federal law called ERISA. And so if it is a valid ERISA plan, then because the federal law allows for subrogation, they do get paid back. So it becomes very important to determine, well, is my health insurance regular health insurance or is it a an ERISA plan? And just the simple guide line on that is, do I work for a giant company or do I work for a little company? If it's a giant company, then they're a self-funded ERISA plan, like Goodyear. They have an ERISA policy. Trying to think of another big one we see all the time here. Um,
Engineers, I've seen sort of engineer unions do
mhm.
ERISA type plans.
Or a lot of health groups, like hospital groups,
Mm-hmm.
will have that as well. And so the general rule is they get paid back as well. But there's also, it gets more complicated from there, looking at whether it's partially insured or partially self-funded. And so Matt has become pretty good at looking through what we call these 5500s, which are their tax forms, to determine whether or not they really do have a valid lien or not under Kansas and Missouri. Uh,
Man, uh, I tell you what, there's not a lot of material on that about those 5500s. So it's I've talked to a number of tax experts and done quite a bit of research to try to figure out, you know, how these things work. Um, but yeah, it's a pretty it seems like a pretty complex part of personal injury cases is these liens that come in at the end of the case.
yeah, and it kind of makes sense as as time goes on and you have uh, more competition for limited resources on getting medical bills paid, that that the law has become more complicated. And it's like, okay, well, we're not going to do this massive windfall for uh, plaintiffs. We're going to get that back
Hmm.
out to various people who have contributed to the payments.
Hmm.
Uh, dad, my dad would always say, back in when he started, you didn't ever have to worry about a lien. It was you just got the settlement and ran. And there was also a law that changed. I think it was 2011. There was a case called Martinez. I forget I forget the full case caption, but it's we call it the Martinez case in Kansas. There's a an equivalent case in Missouri, which allows for the defense to enter into evidence of what was actually paid. Before, juries never got to see that. They'd only get to see what was billed, not what was actually paid. And that really did create somewhat of a windfall for plaintiffs as well, because uh, juries would assume that that was the actual damage. Well, as we all know, the bill is not the bill for medical providers. You get a hospital bill for $20,000 and then you see, well, my insurance paid 12,000 and then 6,000 is written off and then I got to pay my deductible and copay, so it really has developed into a complicated system
Mm,
and so that has uh, followed.
yeah.
The other instance that is a whole different animal is Medicaid and Medicare. So Medicaid being uh, the state funded health insurance for underprivileged. Uh, Really, most of the time you see kids on that, and there's other various reasons to qualify for Medicaid, but um, they get paid back. Medicaid does, and then Medicare, also a federal program. Once you're retirement age or disabled, you qualify for Medicare, and they get paid back. Uh, since they revamped CMS, the what does CMS stand for? The Center for Medicare Subrogation. Is that what it
Services.
stands for? Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, that is all online to get your conditional payments. They call it a conditional. They have their own system for recovery from third party liability, and that's something to consider.
It's the best system. Of
It
all the
is a
different things that I've
mhm.
dealt with, it's like super easy.
Didn't
Um,
used to be that. It used to be very difficult. They were very slow,
mhm.
and
If you have
uh,
to call someone, you're in trouble. But if you can just deal with the portal,
yeah.
you're in good shape.
So yeah, it's a
Um, and
rare
one
government
other,
efficiency.
yeah, that's rare. That's true. Um, one other tip, MedPay in Missouri, I don't know if we mentioned this, generally does not get paid back,
Yep.
which can work out nicely for clients. Um, okay, I think we're at time on that first half. A little overview of that. How do your bills get paid, and who gets paid back? So let's go ahead and move on. So today we are talking about parenting. As I mentioned, we saw this article that we were caught our attention. The article is called "Why Millennials Dread Having Babies." Great title for an article. Michal Leibowitz, and it starts off with this poem. Uh, they mess you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. Great poem. Um, and it's a little bit dark, but maybe some truth to that. And there was a little quote at the article that I wanted to. She's really, the title shows, exploring this millennial fear of having kids. But the thing that caught my attention about this article was uh, she didn't attribute it to what I usually hear people attribute it to, maybe fear of financial insecurity, desire for professional freedoms, uh, feminism more generally. But she looked at something I'd never really thought of before. And so I'm going to read a little quote here. Adult children seem increasingly likely to publicly, even righteously, cut off contact with a parent, sometimes citing emotional, physical abuse they experienced in childhood, and sometimes things like clashing values, parental toxicity, or feeling misunderstood or unsupported. This cultural shift has contributed to a new, nearly impossible standard for parenting. Not only must parents provide shelter, food, safety, love, but we, their children, also expect them to get us started on successful careers and even hold themselves accountable for our mental health and happiness well into our adult years. So I want to suggest, the author says, that there's another reason my generation dreads parenthood. We've held our own parents to unreachable standards, standards that deep down maybe we know we ourselves would struggle to meet. Um, so yeah, that was kind of an interesting diagnosis of this millennial apprehension, and it's probably more prevalent on the coasts than it is in the Midwest. Um, but but Mike, what did you make of her thesis? What do you make of millennials being baby shy?
Yeah. Well, first off, full disclosure, you know, I have four kids, so I was not baby shy, and and Matt has
I've
three
got
kids.
three. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not baby
uh,
shy over here.
and so we're typical of the subculture that we grew up in, which would be evangelical Christian, where you get married relatively early. I got married super early. I was 21. My wife was 20. We had not finished uh, undergrad yet, and then went to law school. And I did feel some of those current pulls. Like I wanted to wait, and I would say things like, well, you know, I wanted to wait until after law school, certainly. And I wanted to wait to have kids. Really, a couple years after that is what I wanted to do. Um, and for me, my story was, I got out of law school and I'm thinking, really seeing my aging grandparents influenced my decision. And so our decision, my wife and I's decision. Um, and I would say, look, I'm robbing my future kids of potentially any time with their great grandparents and time with my parents, their grandparents. And so that overrode kind of the cultural norm, I think, which was to wait that I felt. Um, as far as the thesis, so that's where I'm coming from. That's um, what happened with us. And then we were very blessed and lucky to have Maddie right away. And then uh, 9 short months after that, uh, we uh, uh, Liz was pregnant with twins. So um, we were off to the races quite quickly after law school. Um, and and it's awesome. One of the things I also like to say is everyone tells you how hard it is because it is hard to be a parent. It's by far the most difficult thing I've undertaken in my life. And I think that it is true for most people. Maybe not, I don't know. Um, but it's also immediately good, you know? You just hold your child for the first time and you immediately love them more than you thought possible. It's
Hmm.
just immediate. And people do say that, but that is so good. And yeah, so that is my experience for this article. I think there is definitely an awareness in mental health that I think this article is talking about, um, that is new to millennials. So uh, in psychology, they're looking at frequently, what traumas have occurred in your life have that lead to behaviors. They're looking at the CBT wheel or cognitive behavioral therapy. It's my emotions influence my thoughts, influence my behaviors. Well, trauma is a big factor in that, um, and a lot of those occur intentionally or not in childhood. And so I think facing that could absolutely push you away from uh, wanting to have kids. And I feel like that's what this article was talking about. It's like they mess you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra. I mean, just for you. And that is a truism, you know, and even I'd say a biblical one. Um,
I did feel like the author was pushing back on maybe the importance, well, the pushing back just on attributing so much of our experience of life to childhood. Um, and she sort of pointed out that it is a very Freudian take, which maybe not is not the only way to interpret our experiences. And she did in one section talk about that interpreting. It is a way we can interpret our experiences, but it maybe is not the only way, which I thought was interesting in light of our previous conversations about how we interpret our experience plays a big role in things. But yeah, I was kind of surprised and I found it refreshing, um, the author's willingness or openness to exploring other ways of thinking about it and thinking about parenthood. Um,
Yeah,
but
do you know it? Asking this question out of the blue during a podcast is probably not the best, but do you know the stats on how how many kids millennials are having on average? It's
mm,
less than what I have, less than
yeah,
four.
yeah, I don't know the stats, but it is. I think it is low. It is low for sure
And
compared to previous generations.
that's creating a kind of a funny bubble, in terms of there's a lot of baby boomers and there's going to be less and less. Um,
Yeah,
and the
I like the
y-
idea of just being more gracious with ourselves and with our parents. Because we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves and a lot of pressure on our parents in with such a hyper focus on sort of childhood experiences being the cause of our foibles.
well,
Um,
sure. And I think it's definitely once you have kids, it's easier to be gracious to your own parents because you're like, oh, they didn't know what they were doing. When you're a kid, like, love you, mom and dad. You're great. I appreciate you. But you do get a sense once you have kids, like they were just making it up as they went along, and they're trying not to uh, make the same mistakes their parents were making. And I saw that in our experience, and you know, our parents were doing all this stuff like going to focus on the family stuff. I'm like, okay, what do we do now? And stuff that our generation is frankly not a big fan of. And I um understand why, and but there's so it's kind of a interesting dance.
I
I
feel like
under
we find ourselves in this spot a lot.
Yeah. Like I don't want to say something that's gonna offend everyone by blasting out an opinion like, yeah, focus on the family is terrible always. Like, well,
Yeah, we just avoid sweeping statements. I think we'll be in good shape if we
probably.
avoid sweeping statements.
Yeah.
Your anecdote about what led you to sort of decide to become a parent reminded me of my experience there. And I was having a conversation with an old friend, Danny Williams. Shout out to my old friend Danny Williams if you ever happen to watch this podcast. Um, he was asking me about kids, and I had this funny idea like I really wanted to start a brewery. So I was like,
Also
I,
a very millennial thing to want to do.
yeah, just trying to lean into that whole millennial vibe.
We're not
And
original. Oh,
no,
also for the viewers, I may not look like a millennial, but I am. I was born in 1985, squarely in the older millennial uh, generation. I don't know why Matt looks so much younger than me at only two
I'm
years
getting to
younger.
that salt
Yeah,
and pepper there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I see that. I got it.
There it
I
is.
got it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I was like, I'm going to wait to have kids until after start a brewery, and which is such a silly, I don't know. And he was like offended. He had just had his first kid, and he like hit me with that Psalm Psalms verse that's like arrows in the quiver.
Oh my God. Screw that guy. Sweeping statement. He did not with the quiver.
Honestly, honestly, like I know that that's like a very people probably would find that judgy, but he's not. He's
He
not a
wasn't
judgy
coming
guy.
at it like that. Yeah, yeah,
No, and I actually really appreciated it, and it just kind of shifted my perspective a little bit. Like, man, kids, maybe kids are blessings, just by themselves, you know, um, blessings that are worth pursuing. Uh,
yeah. Definitely, totally
mhm,
agree. The there's a couple different ways to look at it, but I think where I come down on it is where you're coming down on it, which is people are valuable and kids are just this amazing, miraculous thing that comes out of you and your spouse. Like it's incredible that you get to see parts of you and parts of them that combine into a whole new person. It is wildly um, valuable. Um, but that being said, the world is scary, and you're not going to be able to protect those kids from pain and suffering. Um, that just is the way it is, and so that is scary. And so I do think it the fear of hurting them or causing them suffering, uh, or that we're not up to the challenge, totally understandable fears. Um, but I do think it is uh, a noble and courageous thing to go ahead and engage and do your best and know that you're not going to be perfect as a parent
mhm.
and you're going to do things. And Liz and I joke that we'll go ahead and pay for therapy for our kids because we are undoubtedly unknowingly screwing them up in some way.
Well, I mean, from a Christian point of view, um, the we have some confidence and hope and faith that the ways in which we're screwed up become the ways God's grace becomes most visible in our lives. You know, it's like God comes in and brings healing and um, restoration, and it's like those ways in which we make mistakes become some way the monument of God's grace, the monuments of God's grace. Not that we should, as Paul says, sin more so that grace may increase, but I think there is a kind of hope that comes with faith, that God can do some wonderful things in spite of our foibles.
Yeah. No, I think that is it yeah, grace matters and forgiveness matters and in any family dynamic you have to have that because you're gonna hurt people because we're flawed people and um I there's just no way around it in a family dynamic. You gotta be able to forgive each other,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is also a great uh reason to have more than one kid because you grow up or you know Matt had lots of opportunities to forgive his big brother who would beat up on him and that sort of thing. You
I'm
just
very traumatized, Mike.
probably um just thinking of one time we Mark Robinson, shout out to Mark Robinson, buried Matt in furniture and then
Mm-hmm. I think the most like shocking moment for me growing up was when we were at Mark's neighbor's pool, and I got
we
dunked
just kept dunking you. Yeah. Oh my
so much
gosh.
so that I threw up on the side of the pool. So I had my vengeance.
Did you?
I threw up on the side of the
Oh,
pool.
that was. I think we just kind of splashed water on it and left. With Matt, we wouldn't have, you
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, that's a fun
So,
note to end on, don't you think?
yeah, that time I almost drowned my brother, but, you work for me now. So I guess there was forgiveness and
There was
restoration,
forgiveness, restoration, peace.
grace, and
Now we get to do a podcast together.
that's right. That's right. Where Matt finally was like, I'm going to bring it up again. That time, a
Publicly shame him.
little bit of vengeance in there as well. But yeah. So, I would say, if you're listening and you're thinking about having kids, you should. It's an amazing journey, and my daughter Maddie is just she's 12 and turning 13, going into seventh grade, and just the thoughts and creativity, and she's just blowing me away,
Mm.
and that and it is the latest gift of many gifts in parenthood. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
so yeah, it is scary, and it's still scary. It's like, but certainly something worth doing.
Yeah.
Maybe the most important, definitely for me and my set of priorities, the most important thing. And all of this, including the podcast, is in service to that. Sometimes we get those priorities screwed up too, which,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for chatting with me about parenthood, Mike, and personal injury claims. And thank you, listener, for being with us. And we will see you next time.